Humans have always developed along the water, and of course, either side of the Assunpink is within the floodplain of the creek. So as we have encroached upon that floodplain and put impervious surfaces, houses, buildings, parking lots, driveways, we have reduced the ability of that watershed to capture and manage that water. Trenton is, of course, the downstream portion of the Assunpink Creek, so it is impacted by any development that is occurring upstream because the water, instead of being absorbed into the ground, is running directly into the creek. It's flowing faster and higher down into Trenton, which is exacerbating the flooding in the city.
That the Assunpink Creek was the site of the Second Battle of Trenton. In fact, a pivotal point of the American Revolution. George Washington held back Cornwallis as he was trying to take Trenton. And he held him at the Assunpink Bridge, which became the turning point of the American Revolution. The Assunpink Creek has played important roles in the life and here in the city of Trenton since it always existed. And I think it's up to us to make sure that we take care of the creek and pass it on to the next generation in better shape than what we found it. I'm the president of the 6th Regiment United States Colored Troops Reenactors Incorporated. We are the developers for the Locust Hill Cemetery and Black Museum around you. We're in the process of reconstructing this building as part of the history of Trenton and the Assunpink Creek. It was started in 1861. When cemeteries were segregated here in the city of Trenton. And any African American that was passed away during that time was buried here at Locust Hill. And many of the luminaries and free Africans that lived in the city of Trenton are interred here in Locust Hill. This house was built in 1876 and has stayed in the neighborhoods from that time, and we're going to make this into a museum. The creek, the Locust Hill Cemetery, and the industry around it were part of the lifeblood of the city of Trenton. And the Assunpink Greenway project is here to try to restore the creek itself and make it more accessible to the people in Trenton for their own use.
Historically, the industries were built along the creek to take advantage of the water power. Many of the industries were either used water for transport. The rail lines are right there, and so that was another important factor in the location of the industries. Back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the development was encroaching on the creek, which was what was happening all over at the time. That wasn't unusual, but they had the foresight to realize that this might be problematic in the long term, and they actually reached out to the Olmsted brothers, the landscape architecture firm that is considered the father of landscape architect. Frederick Law Olmsted built Central Park in New York City. He also designed and built Cadwallader Park, the jewel in the city of Trenton's park system. And so they commissioned the Olmsted brothers to develop a plan for a greenway along the creek, and that plan was completed in 1907. The plan that we are working from today has a much wider footprint than what Olmsted was looking at 100 years ago, but the idea of meandering trails along the creek and connectivity along the creek, it all is still, 100 years later, still relevant and what we're aspiring to.
My parents bought 62 acres in 1966, and I grew up right in this woods and right around this whole town. As a child, we would do things like follow these streams along to the headwaters, to where the springs come out, and down to what are now the lakes that are supplied by it.
This was first preserved in 1972. It was used for flood control and erosion control for the city of Trenton. So The Assunpink, this was a major drainage and flood control area for the Assunpink Creek, and the impoundments were built, and then the land was given over to the state of New Jersey for preservation and to manage for flood control and erosion control.
Wetlands that are kind of off to both sides of me here are, they're groundwater fed wetlands. And so there are a number of different wetland types. One of the things that makes this wetland unique is that, it's kind of saturated soils all derived from groundwater. And it's one of those like neat situations, we're out here in July, it's a fairly, hot, humid day, but you can go into that wetland, which is very deep and mucky, and I wouldn't recommend it right now, but you can, stick your hand down into that wetland and it's gonna be cold water. And that's gonna be, whether you're in the middle of August or, early February, that groundwater is a feature of this wetland that allows a certain plant community to exist here that can't necessarily exist in other wetland types. And in turn, it allows a certain assemblage of species that have evolved to live in these wetland types to proliferate here. And so it makes it a really unique habitat type in an otherwise big sea of green.
So the Assunpink Preserve goes from here, and this is the farthest, I'm going to say east. This is the farthest east point of it, and it goes all the way out, very close to Mercer Park in Mercer County. Going back, this was all open, wide open space back in the 60s and 70s. There were very, very few people, comparatively speaking, than there are now. Right now, we have a lot of houses, the properties. There's fences up. There's a lot more lawns than there used to be.
People need respite from the urban lives that we live in, especially in this area, right? In New Jersey, the most densely populated state in the nation. And so here's a place where we can get respite, and yet they're going to destroy it. We all thought it was part of the park. If you look across the lake, that 5 or 6 acres of woodland right there, it just fits in. It's who wouldn't think that was part of the park? Then all of a sudden, here's this application for that's privately owned, and it's going to be destroyed, and we're going to put up a 3-story hotel. I couldn't even tell my family for weeks because I was like, oh my God. And then I told them around the table, and we were all crying. We're like, what? This can't be. I said, that's why I didn't tell you. And my daughter was like, well, we can't just sit here. We have to do something. And she was the one who created the Facebook page and the change.org, where we got 5,000 signatures over time, over a very brief period of time.
Colonial Lake is part of the Shabbaconk Creek, and it would be just a stream here if it weren't for the dam. And the Shabbaconk, with its origins up in Ewing and Hopewell, 2 branches, ends up here in the lake over the dam, under Route 1, and empties into the Assunpink Creek. People, even beyond Lawrence Township, up in Hopewell, over in Ewing, to recognize that they are part of a bigger watershed. They are part of a combination of streams, which all end up in the Delaware River for us, from the Shabbaconk to the Assunpink to the Delaware River. And that involves 3 or 4 different communities, Hopewell, Ewing, Lawrence, and Hamilton, and Trenton, 5 communities right there. And so each community has to work together to realize that they're part of a big, big picture. It's not just them and their little stream, and that what happens upstream happens downstream, eventually, good or bad. And we want whatever happens upstream to be good, so everything downstream is also good, and every point along the way.
I wish people knew that the Assunpink Creek existed and was connected to the Delaware River, because then they would understand that all these interconnected waterways can affect our drinking water supply, and would be more mindful about the stormwater runoff and the pollutants they use and how that could affect the oceans and the water we drink.